All right, I'm going to call to order the February 17th meeting of the West Sacramento City Council Redevelopment Successor Agency and Financing Authority. We're going to begin as we do each week with the Pledge of Allegiance. So we'd like to invite our guests to join the council and staff in the pledge, which tonight will be led by Mr. Donald Terry.
Ready, salute. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The council did meet in closed session this evening to confer with our labor negotiator regarding negotiations with West Sacramento Firefighters Association Local 522, and to confer with our legal counsel regarding one item of initiation of litigation. No action was taken, so we'll proceed to item 1A, which is presentations by the public on matters not on the agenda but within the jurisdiction of the City Council. As is noted on our agenda, this is an opportunity for the public to have a public forum, recognizing that state law precludes us from taking action or having a discussion on items that are brought up under item 1A. We do ask that anyone wishing to address the council on this or any other item this evening to please fill out one of the yellow cards that's available near the front door and turn it into the city clerk. In front of the clerk is a timer that we use to make sure that everyone has a chance to be heard, and to that end we ask that all comments be limited to no more than 3 minutes. Also in front of the clerk is an analog flip chart that indicates which agenda item we're currently considering. We take the yellow cards all the way up to the conclusion of the staff report on any agenda item. Once the council questions or the public comment has begun, we don't take any additional speaking requests, so please be sure to try to get your speaking card in before the conclusion of the staff report. We also recognize that for some folks, speaking in public can cause some anxiety and hives and other undesirable side effects. So we do ask that there not be any boos or catcalls or even applause or other demonstrations. We try to maintain a civil discourse here in the chambers. So with that, we have no requests to speak under item 1A, so we're going to proceed to item 1B, which is council communications. Are there any reports or other communications this evening? Mr. Ledesma.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. On February 8th, we had a meeting of the Yolo County Transportation District. It was a short calendar, or short agenda, but we did have one item of concern, really just a workshop, but we listened to some updates on the YCTD fixed route fare box revenue, which, like all other transit districts, we're seeing a downturn in that revenue. We also had a review of the RT's issue paper regarding, issues regarding their possible fare changes. As you probably see in the news, RT is considering increasing their fare charges for the district, and they're going through a series of public meetings now to determine that. Again, it's one thing that we'll have to consider and think about for our constituents and that use YCTD in West Sac, obviously, because they'll be impacted for those who get other route changes in the RT district in downtown Sacramento. So there was some concern on our end. If they do increase it, there could be a look at, do we need to match that, or do we need to have some other fare increase, because we're also losing fare revenue. So it will be most definitely be an item we'll have to talk about in the upcoming budgeting cycle with them. Other than that, no other issues of import. I will say also this last Wednesday, the 10th, I had a meeting also with the Sacramento Metro Chamber president and their policy director. They asked for some time to talk about transit issues. As I think we mentioned at one point during our strategy sessions that the Metro Chamber is taking transit issues as a issue that they want to focus on in 2016, along with a few other things. So it was just an informational meeting, no action, no items. We did have some discussions about some of the work that our Public Works team has been doing with YCTD here in West Sacramento, but all of it is looking at how all the transit districts can work better together going forward, make the transit system in the Sacramento region more efficient and more consistent. So again, no actions, but they wanted to start a dialogue with us on that. So anyway, that's all I had to report today.
All right, thank you, Mr. Ledesma. Mr. Kristoff.
Yeah, very quickly, Mr. Mayor, West SAPCO met on, sorry about that. West Sac SAPCO met on Thursday, February 11th. We are still in the negotiating mode with property owners, and I think we've come to some kind of conclusion with 4, and we've made offers to a number of other property owners, so we're slowly but surely starting to chip away at the properties that will be necessary for the construction of setback levy or the levy project itself. So moving forward, and we will eventually get there.
Mayor Pro Tem Sandy? Okay, just a couple, the Bike Share Policy Committee met a week or two ago with representatives of our city, Davis and Sacramento, as well as RT and SACOG. And moving forward on that project pretty aggressively, met with our consultant who's been analyzing some of the successes and some of the challenges that other regions have had in the country in moving forward on the Bike Share project. We've been very clear about the need to treat this like a business project and to get it done. I mean, it's not the bridge, it's not the streetcar project. It's not a simple project, but it's also not as complicated. But SACOG has been taking the lead on coordinating the project. It's now going to take the lead on the overall project management as well. Similar to, but different from the streetcar project, in that the Bike Share would be essentially a regional program that SACOG would operate directly. That will allow us to not have to worry about creating yet another governance mechanism, yet another JPA, and to rely on the SACOG structure to govern that project. So some important progress on that project. I also was at the U.S. Conference of Mayors last month for our annual winter meeting in Washington, D.C., at the White House with the President, and then facilitated some sessions with the Secretary of Education on summer opportunity and youth employment, and also with the Secretary of Labor, who said to all of the mayors of America that West Sacramento is a great model for education and workforce development. I don't know how he knows that, but it was nice to hear. And during that week, the city manager and deputy city manager also came to Washington, and we did a series of our advocacy visits with some of the key policymakers in Washington, including the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers on continued progress on our flood project. Then the work that Mr. Kristoff was just describing, as the council knows, the Civil Works Review Board has given its necessary approval for completion of the GRR. We're on track for that. And it's critical that we get all of the approvals that we need for the flood project ASAP, so that we can be in the Water Resources and Development Act legislation this year, and that we can do that while we still have an Army Corps of Engineers that supports our project. Not that the next Army Corps of Engineers wouldn't, but this Army Corps of Engineers leadership knows our project, knows us. They know where we've had a side agreement or a wink and a nod in order to move a project forward. They know our collaboration. So it's even with an administration that would be just as supportive, we'd have to start fresh with them. And so we're really, and the Congress doesn't do a Water Resources Act every single year. So this is our moment. It's why it's really critical. The lead staffer for the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Civil Works, the civilian who runs the Army Corps of Engineers, met with us at the Pentagon on the project. And he essentially said, look, I promised you that we would get this thing done. I have been dying to retire. My granddaughter is waiting for me to retire. I'm not leaving till I fulfill my promise. So it was a very positive meeting, and he's committed that that they will do everything possible to make sure that we are in WRDA. He's going to be back on Capitol Hill once he does retire, working with the Senate and the House on the writing of WRDA. So we're in a good position there, but he's also expediting all of the necessary permits and approvals for that to happen. So it was a productive meeting, but it's definitely one of those sessions that has been, almost every member of the council's participated in one of these at one time or another, but it's the accumulation of 5,000 meetings that we've had with us and the chamber and Cap to Cap and everything else, and then all of the tremendous work by our staff and our partners in the agencies and everyone else that's has made the project progress on time and has delivered where we said that we would. So That was a very positive development. We also met with the top leadership of the Federal Transit Administration on the streetcar project. This was prior to the announcement of the president's budget, but it was in that meeting that they gave us a pretty clear signal that we would be in the president's budget, and that the discussion was a positive one, and there really was a good conversation about issues and how we would solve issues that might pop up along the way over this coming year, as opposed to what we have, what you often end up with are issues that are reasons to stop or slow down a project. That was clearly not where FTA was at. So that was very positive. Same thing, if we don't get this across the finish line this year, it's hard to see a scenario in which we would be able to go back in 2017 in a new administration and start fresh again. So the key elements of this are us proceeding with the environmental review, the governance documents, and all the rest of the project management elements, and then the financing pieces, the two core pieces being, well, the three core pieces being the cap and trade application that we are preparing for the state, the Sacramento property owners vote, and then a request to go from the $75 million that the president has proposed in the budget to $100 million, consistent with the new federal transportation legislation that was passed at the end of last year. So those were just two of them, but there were several other sessions that Mr. Robinson, Mr. Tuttle participated in as well on a wide variety of topics. So and we didn't get trapped. Barely, but none of us got trapped in the snowstorm. So. All right, if there's no other council communications or reports, defer on the appointments and proceed to item 2, which is presentation of a proclamation honoring Elena Birch Santos for her service on the Commission on Aging and the Parks, Recreation, and Intergenerational Services Commission. Is there a motion on the proclamation?
Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Johannesson and seconded by Mayor Pro Tem Sandin. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, that motion carries. You would join me at the podium. Come over here. This is just a artifact of our old council chambers back from when we were in a borrowed facility and there were no other cameras. So even though I know it seems rude to the council,
It does.
but they can see us on their monitors,
that I'm
and this way all of the general public and the folks at home can see you as well. So.
Yeah.
All right, so this is a proclamation of the West Sacramento City Council honoring Elena Birch Santos for her work on the Commission on Aging and the Parks, Recreation, and Intergenerational Services Commission. Whereas Elena was appointed to the commission in 2009, and whereas she volunteered to represent West Sacramento on the Yolo County Commission on Aging and Adult Services and the Yolo County Triad Task Force, provided valuable input on the Leadership Summit for 2013 and 2014 Senior Resource Fairs for summer place living at Westgate, assisted living facility, the budget, and the Generation Bridge programs. Let's bring back some memories. And whereas Elena played an instrumental role in the creation of the current senior transportation program and in the distribution of information for senior services to residents of the city. In addition, she helped set Commission on Aging priorities and helped to protect seniors from becoming victims of fraud and abuse. And whereas Elena strongly believes in the City of West Sacramento's support for the senior citizens of West Sacramento, and whereas while Elena was a member of the commission, the Parks and Recreation Department offered the West Sacramento community more recreation leisure programs than at any other time in the history of the city. And whereas Elena was a member of the commissions when the Parks and Recreation Department issued increased recreation program with the opening of our new community center. And whereas Elena's involvement on the commission demonstrates her belief that involvement is the key to success. So now therefore be it proclaimed that the City Council of the City of West Sacramento recognizes Elena Birch Santos for her hard work and dedication while serving on the Commission on Aging and the Parks, Recreation, and Intergenerational Services Commission, and does honor her with this proclamation.
Thank you.
Congratulations and thank you.
Thought we did all that stuff.
You did, yeah.
Great, sir.
I also officiated Elena's wedding, but I do also just still, yes, no wedding I've ever officiated no marriage from a wedding I've ever officiated is not still going. So Keep it up, Elena, good job. But Elena was one of the first of a new generation of West Sacramentans that wanted to work on issues around active aging and around services for seniors that wasn't a senior herself. And as we've now shifted our own city strategy to think about intergenerational services around a continuum of planning and infrastructure and land use and everything else that thinks about the person and their entire life as opposed to just categories. Elena was a pioneer in that work. So thank you very much for helping to lead the way. All right, that brings us to item 3, which is initial discussion of planning, zoning, and streamlining as a potential subjects for inclusion in a municipal charter. Mr. Robinson.
Good evening. In August of 2015, the council voted to embark upon a process to study the possibility of municipal charter for the city. Tonight's report is the 4th and final in a sequence of topic-specific reports related to that. The topic for this evening is planning, zoning, and streamlining. In regards to planning, we looked at this, and there are many requirements in the government code and the other state codes that govern general law cities relative to planning processes. And a lot of those revolve around the noticing requirements that are required for specific types of projects. Those vary across different types of projects, and there's also strange requirements kind of larded into the code, such as general law cities can't adopt an ordinance at a special meeting. And this forms kind of a minefield when the city's trying to help a private sector partner work through our regulatory processes, because it's incumbent on us to help them hit all of the noticing requirements. So one of the upsides, potential upsides of a charter would be that charter cities have the ability to adopt their own kind of consistent reporting or, noticing requirements for projects, which would make it simpler for the city to process and for applicants to navigate that. With regard to streamlining more generally, one of the items we noticed is that with real property acquisition and disposition, when we had redevelopment, there was a whole body of law associated with the redevelopment process that allowed cities to acquire and dispose of property for economic development purposes. And our ability to do that outside the context of redevelopment is a lot less clear. So one of the potential upsides of a charter, a streamlining type benefit, would be for the charter to include provisions that would give the city clear rights to acquire and dispose of property for economic development purposes. That's not the only way to do that. It would be possible to either propose or support state legislation that would change the general laws affecting this to give the city a similar right without being a charter city. Also, with regard to streamlining in terms of public contracts, one of the items that we came up with is that, in the public contracts code, it's required for the city for public works projects over $5,000 to be publicly bid. And there's important reasons for that in terms of getting the best value for the taxpayers' dollars. But one of the side effects of that is that the fixed cost of producing those bid packages can actually exceed the value of the construction contract itself. So there have been situations, for example, where a construction project or a public work is, say, $5,000 or $10,000, and the cost to produce the bid package to get that work done is $20,000 or something like that. So one of the things that charter cities can do is adopt their own rules around that so that, for example, the traditional public bidding process wouldn't be required until a project's value hits something like $75,000 or something like that. So that can make more sense from an efficiency standpoint. This is obviously not an exhaustive list of the potential benefits, but that's hopefully some food for discussion there. What we're going to do is take the input that you provide tonight, combine that with the input that you've given at your previous meetings, and come back on March 16th with a report that kind of encapsulates that and gives the council the opportunity to give us direction whether you wish to proceed with the production of a draft charter or not, at which point, if you did, we'd come back at a future meeting with an actual draft for you to look at. That's the end of my presentation. I'd be happy to try and answer any questions that you have.
Mayor Pro Tem Sandy, this is your topic area.
And I want to thank you, Mr. Robinson, for putting this together. When I was thinking about these topics, I think there isn't a lot that we can do in the planning and zoning area.
Yeah.
In particular, I think you called that out. In terms of the streamlining areas, I think you've called out some examples, as you mentioned, a number of things where we can modernize what we do. For example, the noticing, as you shared with us in the staff report, we can use other modalities of communicating with folks that may be more efficient, maybe more effective. And so I think you've called out some things that will be worth our conversation here. Whether or not that warrants our moving forward to a charter, I think that's also something we'll be calling the question as we pull together all of these in a subsequent meeting.
I had a couple of, well, I don't know if they're questions so much as just topic here. So a couple of which may have come up in in the innovation session that we also raised. So you probably have notes on a couple of these notions elsewhere as well. There was a TEDx talk given. I don't know if anyone else, I didn't go to it, but I heard the major elements around, and I've heard this discussion elsewhere about the dramatic implications of the self-driving car, evolution, and also our utter lack of preparedness across the non-obvious areas of, the folks who regulate motor vehicles or who regulate driver tests. That's where they're paying attention to it, but the vast majority of others are not. In terms of, and land use is one of those areas. So as an example, parking requirements, but a variety of others, right? This is one of those that the shift is possible, and that if it's both possible and potentially quite soon, given the amount of resources that are being invested and how far along in the regulatory process several of these innovations are, that potentially implicate pretty wholesale revisions to the way that we think about a broad array of policies, but as I say, many of them in the zoning and land use arena. I don't pretend to have thought it through at all, although there are a lot of articles and TED Talks and others around that arena, and so particularly as we're moving into things like the general plan review and that sort of thing, whether we should be cognizant of some of the contextual factors that seem like they're far away, because it still, I think for a lot of people it feels like it's a Jetsons technology, and yes, if it happened, it would be a big deal, but we got time to think about it, and it'll happen slowly, and if it starts, then we'll just we'll watch what Rancho Cordova is doing, and we'll just copy them, and we'll make it a little bit better. But that's not how these kinds of technology changes have been happening. And so thinking about our capacity to adapt rapidly or to pre-adapt to those kinds of changes was a topic I think that we talked about for maybe 1 minute in the innovation session. But as I say, it's part of what has emerged from the national conversation on this is just how completely improperly tooled up we are across a whole range of city functions to deal with it. And we've really only been thinking about what do we do about our stoplights and stuff like that, and not about the rest. And importantly, things like parking and our parking requirements and that sort of thing. Taxi regulations and elsewhere. And I think this is part of the noticing piece, but as we look more at this, and you may have looked at, because you've heard me mention this 1,000 times now, the 3 readings ordinance piece,
Right.
which I don't know if is that this section, or did we cover that in a different
I think
topic?
it got mentioned in another
Okay.
session, but it would be relevant here as
It's
well,
related to this,
streamlining
right? So
mechanisms.
I would like to understand if there's a way for us to, both to unravel that concept, because it's absolute, the one workshop followed by a first reading, followed by a second reading, followed by a third reading. So the four times up is absolutely a horse and buggy era, approach to city government. I mean, that reasoning behind how you do public transparency and public engagement really was all about, the news getting from Woodland to here or vice versa 100 years ago. So that, and charters have the ability to set some of the rules about ordinances. We don't have all the authority. So I'm still curious as to whether or not that's an area where we might be able to take a look. Not simply to remove those elements, but to think about other ways that are more performance-based around public engagement and transparency than sort of old technology-based, whether it's newspapers or town criers or horses. not just replacing those and writing into our charter, you know, that it'll have to be delivered by Snapchat at least 8 hours. I don't propose to do that, but where a charter might establish what the criteria are for the mechanisms and the means and the timeframes by which we communicate to the public and provide the means for them to communicate with us. And those criteria would then allow the council to be able to adopt the specific technologies as they happen. Because right now, all these transparency rules, they're all one directional. They're really about how do we tell the public about something that's happening, and you know, full stop. There's no we have no requirement that we actually listen to anything, and we don't provide in law, we don't provide any real meaningful ways for people to interact that are not kind of a lot of work. Right, so we'll send out a mailer within 500 yards or whatever, 500 feet of a project, and then you take the night off work, you take the night off, or you leave your kids home alone, or you can try to get a sitter, you can come to some meeting, you say your thing for 1 minute, you have no idea whether it was effective at all. But it's a large amount of expenditure of time and effort by you, and its influence on the process is kind of doesn't match up with the amount of time that you put into it. Whereas we have plenty of tools through crowdsourcing or through social media or others that would provide alternatives, not necessarily in place of that, but that are at least equally valid in terms of their ability to provide citizens with the means to respond in ways that are convenient to them. Right, so you hear about a project and you could just tweet send a tweet to City Hall that would be much faster. But we don't create those and so it would allow for more casual engagement by citizens on a regularized basis rather than not involved, and then freaked out of your mind that something horrible is going to happen, and then run down to City Council and get a sitter. I mean, there's really the only two modalities that we have, and those are the only two that are sanctioned by law. And so, I mean, this issue around noticing is partly about efficiency. It's partly about our ability to not lose projects. Now that we're competing with cities in Korea and elsewhere that don't have CEQA and don't have some of these other rules, it does affect us when we have unnecessary notice and other requirements. But it's not mainly about that to me. It's mainly about how do we create more effective ways for the public, more relevant and effective and authentic ways for the public to participate in these land use and zoning processes, because we know they care about it, but we really have only figured out how to get people engaged by scaring them at the last possible minute about some project, and it's not fair to them. It's not helpful to us or to project proponents to just get I can't stand this project and the last possible day on the third reading of a project when it's already gone through 18 months of review. So that to me is still the area I'm the most interested in this land use and zoning piece. Is it seems like there's a triple bottom line win here in terms of being more efficient and competitive and increasing our public engagement in a meaningful way, and reducing some of our unnecessary costs. So that was one area. On the bidding side, I want to say at the beginning of the process we said we didn't want to touch the competitive bidding element. I thought that was one of our. We're not going strong mayor. We're not doing competitive bidding, and there was one other one. Oh, we're not prevailing wage. I thought those were the three.
Okay.
Don't touch those.
In my zeal for content for this report, I may have overlooked that, so I'm sorry.
No. So I'm only mentioning that because I think we did say that.
I think you're correct.
And I still believe that if there's if you're figuring out how to tune the way in which the competitive bidding rules are applied, I'm certainly open to that. And I know we learned, I didn't, but you did. You learned something from the whole Pittsburgh procurement. There's been a lot of work done through Code for America and a lot of other outfits about how to just make procurement work better. And if there are implications for how we might, within the framework of competitive bidding, accomplish some of those reforms through a charter, I would certainly love to hear about them as well. Then the only piece is the one other area that's just is a reminder to me about how some of our rules are challenging, and maybe it's structural, maybe it's not, maybe just some rules always will be. But looking back at our experience on the food truck regulation, and how part of the, in some sense, like the craft brewery stuff, but some of these elements that once in a while, if you take a step back, you're like, there's something, there's something not exactly right about the way we do this fundamentally. And our community development director has sort of mentioned some of the same things, not necessarily about those topics, but the same thing that kind of drives us to think about, well, what about form-based codes or performance-based zoning or other approaches? If we wanted to be able to employ more innovative approaches around land use and zoning in those domains, how much of that is allowed under the general law rules for the state zoning law and everything else, and how much, if any, would require a charter. So, I mean, one of those areas that I've become more and more interested in as we have evolved this entertainment district notion is like taking that even further. We get occasional inquiries from folks now that we have more of the millennial urban residents than we might have had, than anyone had 20 years ago, who ask questions like, why do we have to have bicyclists stop at stop signs? And I'm a bicyclist, I'm also a driver, and it scares the hell out of me to not have people stop at the stop signs. But there are cities experimenting with this. But if we were to do something like that, that feels like that's the sort of thing that we might have a part of the city in which we were in the same way that we're experimenting with noise and with some of the other, and parking and some other policy frameworks, that if we had a framework that specifically more explicitly allowed us to innovate in ways that did not bleed into the rest of the community. So I'm rambling about this because I'm trying to toy with this as well, but I don't know, and I don't know how much of it is a charter versus a general law issue. I just know there have been many places that have really figured this out. Most of them have tried one size fits the whole city answers, and I think it's clear, given what we're trying to do here, is affirmatively create very different kinds of places in the same city, that approach is not appropriate for us, and maybe we need more tools in order to accomplish that. So, I'm just trying to get us started. Any other comments? Mr. Kristoff?
For me, after sitting through the 3 different or 4 different hearings that we've had on charter city versus general law or whatever, and the explanation of the charter city thing, I think a general law city can do a lot of the things that we've talked about from a perspective of a charter city. So I really don't want to reinvent the wheel as far as general law city versus charter city. I think that it would be good for us to take some of the some of the charter discussion and see if we could fold that into policies, ordinances, rules, regulations, or whatever, into our regular general law city plan that we've had for going on 30 years. So I'm really not looking forward to changing a general law city to a charter city. I don't think there's been enough of the issues that we've discussed that really warrant that. So, so far, I'm leaning towards staying a general law city. Now, if we have some further discussion and there's some innovative ideas or innovative things that we can't do because we're not a charter, then I would take a stronger look at it. But I haven't found those things yet that really sort of jump out at me as far as making that kind of change.
Mr. Johannesson.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I think the comments the mayor made and Councilmember Kristoff, I think one of the things when we're going through this is determining whether or not it should go into charter, or we can put it in a general plan, or just have some kind of policy out there that's, of course, changeable as we all change. I think, in terms of the charter, we've talked before about what a preamble of a charter would look like, and how the preamble would set the tone. And it wouldn't go into real specifics on the implementation, but it would set the tone. For example, the aspirations of the city to become a city where folks of all ages could live and work and throughout their lives, but also into the business methods that the city has and its approach to business methods. For example, in the streamlining, so it's about the permitting and the complexity of permitting, the complexity of notice requirements, and some of those issues that are kind of scattered throughout the state codes. But it's also about the transparency of those processes that, and this goes to civic engagement as well, that, for someone who wants to participate in city government, should be a very transparent process, and someone who wants to do business with the city should be a very transparent process over. Also, in the context of a permit, for example, it's where is my permit? And what is it? What are the timelines? Is there some certainty in that? So I can, start a business in X months. And so I know how much money to be able to carry the business, that type of thing, which is really important to, not only just brick and mortar businesses, but real estate development. So I'm not entirely sure how we can put that in a charter, but we definitely could put that in a preamble that the city, will strive to achieve streamlining in all business processes to make them more transparent to participants and to the community, that type of thing. And I think in terms of what Councilmember Kristof mentioned, as we go through this, I also would like to see kind of these concepts that we're bringing up, and depending on how the charter shakes out, where could those fit into the general plan? How can we incorporate them into the general plan? Because I know we've got, each different section has got a policy statement. It's a little bit different than I think we're looking at, a preamble. But, how this general plan's been in existence for 15 or 20 years or something. They tend to be a little long-lived here. And I think, a policy statement in a general plan would definitely have some longevity in it. So, but as we go through these concepts, I mean, we're talking about a lot of things here with innovation, and some of the other subjects we've brought up, to maybe see what that would look like in a general plan document as well.
Mr. Ledesma?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thanks, John, for bringing this forward, and thanks, Mayor Pro Tem Sandin, for doing your work and bringing this to us. I know this was a real interest to you because as we both served on the Planning Commission, and seeing how that process can evolve for projects and what we think we can do and can't. This seems to tell us that there are rails there, whether you're a charter city or not, and so how you manage land use. And it goes back to what our colleagues had said earlier, is the imperative around this, at least for me, was always around what can a charter city do to make the city better? Can it be a vehicle to propel us into the 21st century, to really effectuate changes about how we do things? And to a large degree, I would agree. And this report didn't really bring about anything really earth-shattering to me. Maybe there's a best practices sort of we're pulling from there. I was a little surprised about the bidding one too. I don't recall us putting bidding on the table. I know it was a concern of ours. But one question I did have from this is the approach, the problems, how do I say that? But the issue of how we have to put together a bid package and the cost of that. Is it creating for us any real expense or other types of encumbrances for us, or just is it creating a problem for us that this really needs to be fixed? And to me, it didn't elevate to an issue like we need to fix this somehow. Am I reading that correctly, John?
Oh, Yeah, we did, we inquired with our public works staff, and they expressed an interest in sort of raising the limit, but I think it's something that they've learned how to handle, so it's not a crisis, they're not running around not able to deal with it, but it's an
Right.
expense that they feel could be reduced if we had a more streamlined system.
Right, and again, those are the kind of things that I kind of am cluing into, and back to how we approach this going forward. I think I've learned quite a bit about what we aspire to do, and what we aspire to be. And the things we worry about 10 years from now, will the next council have the tools and the mechanisms to propel the city on towards the middle of the century. Those things are, for me at least, interesting, that I would like to see as we come back on the 16th, 17th of March, is that right? To kind of see how could we affect that, and cumulatively, is it enough for us to look at charter? One-off, nothing is sort of ringing out for me that is a real imperative for us, but the cumulative effect of what are the best practices we learn from each one of these, will it be enough for us to design and develop and go to our constituents and our voters and neighbors and convince them this is necessary, and this is necessary for us, or can we manage it, as Mr. Kristoff brought up, can we manage it through a general law for our purposes? It's a really intriguing question. I think it's been an absolute excellent exercise for the community to understand a little more about our governance structure, what it means to be a general law city. I know when I was running for office, and even today, there were things about general law city I've learned, like I didn't understand we couldn't do that, or you could do that. And it's been an interesting journey, and I think it's been more than worth the time we've taken. I know you put a lot of work into this in some ambiguous, vague direction around what we were looking for, but it really was for an expression of us to understand what will allow us to move forward. So I look forward to kind of that debate and that discussion on the 16th or next month, I'll just say, and being able to understand what it is we can take as best practices and how we might be able to effectuate some of that through either general plan or through our strategic planning sessions or through whatever other mechanisms we have. So appreciate the effort. Thank you.
And I think the whole series of discussions, as my colleague, Mr. Ledesma, has mentioned, has really brought to light a number of areas where we could try to effectuate change. Tonight's discussion, and Mayor, some of the comments you've brought up lead me to think about, gosh, are so many cities around the state burdened by some of the barriers that we have, and we're trying to overcome things that actually would help every city in terms of the way in which we communicate with folks. Limits on, this $5,000 limit, which at some point was a huge number in terms of competitive bidding. If it actually is costing us $20,000 in some cases to come up with a successful $5,000 bid, we could purchase 4 times as much. I mean, how is that, in a way, good stewardship of funds for the citizens? So it seems to me this bigger question, but we can only care, what our work is we care about our city, and we care about the folks here, so it does beg the question, do we need to effectuate, where we can, make a change or make something better, or put into kind of firm terms, this is how we do business here? That'll be the question that's before us in a couple of weeks. What are those issues, and should we actually move forward with that charter? But I think you've raised some huge questions that, in a larger way, that there's barriers in the state that at some point we'll have to, a bunch of the cities around the state will have to move forward and make a larger request to make some of these changes. But for us, it's about West Sacramento, and it's here in front of us now. So again, thank you for all the work and the different pieces, bringing them forward and working with all of us.
I like the cumulative comment. I mean, I agree with everything that's been said about the process and the overall, but this cumulative nature, I think, is important. That some of this process stuff, small things can make a big difference in our edge. Right? In some sense, we have an EIFD about to happen. it's actually quite well known around the state that we are going to be the first, we're first out of the gate. We know our stuff. So if you want to do infrastructure projects, or if you're looking for the place to, it's not that a lot of potential investors in our city would be using the benefits of the EIFD. It is a signal, right? It's a signal that would reinforce what would be in a preamble about we're innovative and efficient and business friendly and all that. We would say that, but that is a tangible example of how we are distinct from other places that reinforces the brand image of the city. Which is why I keep coming back to this first, second, third reading piece is if it is actually legal to change on the charter, but just nobody's taken a look at it. And because that's something that many of our partners in business and in government agencies, they're aware of this because it's been around for 120 years, this whole horse thing. If that were our leading thing, oh yeah, we're the city that delivers, we're about results, we're efficient. For example, you may not know this, but every other city in California, in order to adopt in one of these adopt a land use map or something, they have it takes them 4 times, 4 meetings to accomplish. Under our charter, we can do it in 2, right? Those things actually do make a difference, even if they are not alone earth-shattering all by themselves. And so, as we're thinking about that's what a charter should accomplish. In the same way that the U.S. Constitution, the magic of the U.S. Constitution is like separation of powers. It's not that the Constitution says the country will be stable and diverse and managed. It finds a couple of elements that make the culture and signal the way that the culture is going to work, and a charter for us, I think, could do the same thing. So I think it's helpful not to be looking for the killer app in a charter provision. Like, what's this one provision that's going to be magic and change everything all by itself, but really, what are the cumulative effects of several provisions, and are there some leading ones that would be strong signals to our citizens, to our successors, and to our investors, to other government agencies and our partners around what makes us distinctive and why people should want to live here and do business with us and invest in our community. So I think this is a good. This is one of those areas that has potential to contribute in that domain. Even if I'm not going to go home tonight and think, wow, there was something amazing that we just did in that particular topic.
Just a quick process, as we head towards that, the workshop or the discussion on this in March, all of us have a recollection of our own areas that we brought forward. So back to getting the fullness of the cumulative effect is if we could work with you and kind of, as you're bringing forward what you thought, as you're drafting your report.
Absolutely.
Work with us individually to make sure we're capturing what we thought were those areas. I think that would be a good exercise to remind us all and get us back into thinking. It's been a few months for some of us to kind of have gone through and the exercise. But
Gotcha.
Yeah, for sure. Anything else on this? All right, thank you, Mr. Robinson.
Thank you.
That brings us to the consent agenda, which is items 4 through 11. Actually, just also the city manager has requested that we pull item 13 and continue it to a future date. So without objection, that will be the order. So we'll return now to the consent agenda, items 4 through 11. Are there any items in consent any member of the council wishes to remove, or any item for separate question or comment? Mr. Kristoff?
Number 6.
All right, then item 6 is consideration of award of contract to NeighborWorks Home Ownership Center for administration of home buyer assistance programs. Mr. Kristoff?
Yeah, Ro, I see this didn't make it through EDAC. And so I guess that EDAC does so many things with economic development and all of the grants and other things for home buyers and things. I think it has to get through EDAC. I mean, I think EDAC really deserves to hear this. One of the questions that I have is, it looks like we've got a $500,000 home grant award, or we're going to shoot for that. How many homes can be purchased with $500,000 for first-time home buyers?
So we already have the award. The award was received late last year. It is home funding from the state. We are anticipating anywhere from maybe 10 to 12 home buyer assistance loans, depending on the amount of funding that each household receives. Unfortunately, because of the timing of trying to get the contract approved, it didn't jive with the current calendar for EDAC, for our Housing Advisory Committee, so we were not able to take the contract to them. In the past, we've always tried to do that, but again, because of recent staff changes and the need to get the program up and running, we were not able to coordinate with our Housing Advisory Committee. But we have in the past, you're right, and we typically try to do that with anything related to housing policy.
So is this so time-sensitive that it can't get through E EDAC?
We have currently a waiting list of close to 80 people that are trying to apply for the first-time homebuyer program. We did open up applications late last year, and we had to put some on hold until we completed this process. We have a couple of households that are already going through the process, but we have several that are on the queue to get their applications processed by staff or the consultant.
Okay, thank you.
I just want to reinforce what Mr. Kristoff said about the commissions. The commissions are the council's advisory bodies. They certainly provide advice and recommendations to staff, but they're ultimately responsible for giving us their perspective, and we have, and we very much value their advice, but also their advice is only good if they are getting a constant stream of topics, right? If once a year they get asked about something, it's hard for them to develop the sense of expertise and context and application of that work. So it really is important. All of them would like to meet weekly, and we have said to them, no, we're not having any meetings that aren't necessary. And to their frustration, we've said, no, that's the right balance between your advisory role and staff time. But the trade-off is that when there are real items, the commission needs to be convened. And I think we issued the RFP in November, so we've known. The program itself did not emerge in January. So I just to reinforce that it is important if it's needed to call a special meeting of the commission, that we respect their time and their service and their expertise, and that we help to build their ongoing capacity to provide meaningful advice to us and to improve the value of their community. So I understand why it's here right at the moment, but we really do need to make sure that we're getting these items to them. I agree.
Well, I think that one of the concerns that I have is there's a limited amount of money from the home grant, $500,000. I think it is imperative that our commission on EDAC, or Economic Development and Home, I think it is imperative that they're involved, because it sounds to me like if this is a first-time home buyer program, we are really only talking about 8 residences possibly. I don't know of too many homes out there that are, sitting at $25,000, $30,000, $40,000, $50,000. I don't know of too many of those that wouldn't require a tremendous amount of cash infusion to get that home up to par. So it's important that EDAC look at these kinds of things so that they can, in essence, flush out and get the biggest bang for our buck. Because now we're even going out and we're going to contract with some outside company, Neighborhood Works, and we're going to pay them $50,000, $50,000 to $60,000. Well, I assume that's coming out of the Home Buyer Assistance Program. and so that is even less money. But I just want to make sure that we're getting the biggest bang for our buck when we apply. Now, this may be one of those instances that got caught up in state versus federal because we turned a certain residence level as far as, but I don't see that in this. I don't see that in here. I mean, and it may be that that's why that didn't work, but because this is a state program still. And so, you know, if that's the case, well, then I understand there was a slippage there. But anyway, I think that this is just something I brought it up because I just really don't want to see this kind of thing happen again.
All right. Anything else on this item or the rest of the consent agenda? Is there a motion?
I'll second.
It's been moved and seconded. Seeing no further discussion, and thank you, Mr. Kristoff. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, that motion carries. That brings us to item 12, which is a consideration of redevelopment successor agency resolution 16-8, authorizing the issuance of refunding bonds to refund bonds of the redevelopment agency of the city of West Sacramento as long as overall net present value savings of 3% can be achieved, approving the indenture of trust and approval of related actions. Mr. Blumberg?
Yeah, tonight we're asking that the West Sacramento Redevelopment Successor Agency approve Resolution 16-8 that will authorize the issuance of about $21.5 million in refunding bonds that will refund the 2007 Series A redevelopment debt. This is the last of the redevelopment bonds that we could actually refinance. And in doing so, we would not extend the term of the original maturity of the bonds, and we would project that we would realize about $3.2 million in total savings over the 20-year remaining term. Of course, tonight's action is only one of the actions. We need to go to the Successor Agency Oversight Board as well. We'll do that in March, and then the actions then will be reviewed by the State Department of Finance. So we'll probably be back to you in April, assuming that the state gives us the approval to proceed. And at that time, we would approve the official statement for the bonds, and then hopefully go to market in May and close the deal while interest rates are still low. So with that, I could answer any questions you have.
We've done so many of these in the past 2 years now that they're getting to be old hat. I mean, and, you know, each time there's a savings, and each time the time that the bond was for doesn't change. And so it seems like it's always a good thing. And so we're getting spoiled.
But we still appreciate it.
Yes.
All right, so I don't seeing no further discussion. Is there a motion on item 12?
Move the item.
It's been moved by Mr. Kristoff and seconded by Mayor Pro Tem Sandin. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, motion carries. Thank you. That brings us to council calendar. Are there,
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and members of the City Council. There's a couple of items that might be of interest to you. The SRCSD SASD board meeting scheduled for February 24th, next Wednesday, has been canceled. But in its place, we have the Bayer Crop Science Greenhouse grand opening on the 24th from 9 to 11 that you all have been invited to. And there's also on February 25th at the regular LAFCO meeting is the LAFCO Shared Services Workshop in Woodland at 9 a.m. And that's it.
are there any questions on the calendar?
Just a reminder, staff, I will not be at the first week of March meeting. That's all the future one. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ledesma. City manager report.
No report.
That's never happened. City attorney report. Staff direction for members of the council. And we have no future agenda item requests. Is there a motion to adjourn, Mr. Kristoff?
Yes, I move.
So Mr. Christoph moves, Mr. Johannesson seconds that the meeting be adjourned and that we
Oh, yes.
adjourn in memory of Thelma Rogers. And this is a non-debatable motion,
I
but
think that
Mr.
it would
Christoph
be,
having served
it would
with-
be very nice if we adjourned in her memory. She was on the very first city council. She was a school teacher, and she was quite a lady. And so I think it is very appropriate that we adjourn in her honor.
All right, it's been moved and seconded. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, motion carries. The meeting is adjourned, and we are adjourning in memory of our first member of our city council, Thelma Rogers.